Brett Baty and Francisco Alvarez played a key role in leading the Mets to a comeback win on Monday night. As the Mets' young core matures, maybe they don't have to do as much at the deadline after all.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, the Mets got off to a rough start on Monday night against the Angels as Kodai Senga had quite literally his worst regular season start in over 2 years. Going back to June 4th of 2023, that is when Kodai Senga last gave up more than 3 earned runs and did not make it out of the third inning. In this game, he did make it through 3, but that would be the last time he had a start as bad as his start on Monday night. He had another start that year in 2023, a couple weeks later on June 17th, where he ended up giving up 4 earned runs, but he actually pitched into the 7th inning of that game. That was the last time that Kodai Senga allowed more than 3 earned runs in a game, was June 17, 2023. Across the final 16 starts of the 2023 season, he allowed 3 earned runs or less in each of his starts. He never exceeded that. His one start in 2024, 2 earned runs allowed. And then this year, he did not allow more than 3 earned runs across his first 14 starts. He actually did not allow more than 2 earned runs in 13 of his first 14 starts this year. So with all that said, he was due for a clunker, and we watched that happen on Monday night against an Angels team that has a really good starting lineup. Talked about that going into the series. This team can hit, and they made it tough on Kodai Senga. He clearly did not have his best stuff, and he just ran into a really tough third inning, and that's really all it comes down to. First inning ended up being a solid frame for him. Second inning gives up a solo homer. That's it. Third inning, infield hit starts it off. He gets a couple of outs, so he's nearly out of a jam. Or it wasn't even a jam at that point. It was just a seeing eye single in the infield. But then he walks Mike Trout, gives up a double to Taylor Ward that scores 2, then a base hit to score a third run of that inning. All of a sudden, it's given up 4 runs in his start. Walks another batter before he finally gets a strikeout to escape. At that point, he had thrown 37 pitches in that one inning. He was at 73 pitches on the day. He went into the start. We learned after the game by Carlos Mendoza that he had 80 pitches to give. So it didn't make any sense setting him back out there for the 4th inning. And he was done. So the Mets were trailing 4-0 with their starting pitcher out of the game and Kevin Herget in there just trying to get them through some of those middle innings. He did that, and Brett Baty got the Mets a lot closer in the 4th inning, hitting a 2-run homer, driving in Jeff McNeil, who had drawn a walk. The 11th home run of the season for Baty, and this homer came left on left. All of a sudden, we're seeing Brett Baty get some starts against left-handed pitching, and I'm loving it because you know what? He is giving you a good at-bat. He gives you a great glove in the infield. I think at this point, it's pretty fair to say that Brett Baty is probably the second most complete infielder on this team. And what I mean by that is, as much as I can talk up Pete Alonso's defense, and I think as a first baseman, Pete Alonso is very solid over there, but you're not looking at Pete Alonso and saying, oh, he's a Gold Glover. Francisco Lindor, obviously, you are looking at him as a Gold Glover. Brett Baty right now is giving you defense that looks pretty close to a Gold Glove level at third base, and he's been really good at second. He's making all the plays, made a big play in this game, and all of a sudden he's actually giving you an above average at bat. Luis Acuna is a great defender, but he still has to put it together offensively, and Mauricio is just still too early on for me to make a great judgment on him. Baty, we'll talk about him more in the next segment, but it feels like he's just coming into his own. Like, he's confident, he knows he belongs, and he's finally showing why he was once one of the top prospects in the game. So that home run got the Mets closer. Kevin Herget, again, got them through the middle innings, got 7 big outs. Chris Devanski came in, helped Kevin Herget get through that 6th inning without the Mets giving up a run. But then in the 7th, Devanski did give up a run. Brazoban came in to help bail him out of a jam, and Brett Baty made that big play where he was able to field a ball and come home with it and get a runner at the plate. Brazovan then got a big strikeout to strand another runner that was in scoring position. And through 7, going into the bottom of the 7th inning, the Mets were trailing 5-2, but they still needed a rally. And it was Francisco Alvarez that started a rally with a leadoff walk. Alvarez looks like a completely different player. He showed up now with a mustache, new look for him. And you were just curious to see how is it going to translate, because he was homering pretty much every single game in Syracuse lately. But what's it going to look like against MLB competition? And from the first at bat, you could tell there was just a more confident player in the box. Also, a more confident player behind the dish. Seemed like he was receiving the ball better, blocking the ball better. He threw out a runner. There was a play where it was a little squibber out of the box that he had to run out and get and make a good throw on. He just looked really buttoned up across the board. And also, it was awesome to see the Mets faithful in the crowd at Citi Field showing him love. I mean, you got to love to see an ovation like that for a guy that clearly just went through a real hurdle for him in his career, and he's met with that support. And yes, he didn't think he grounded out in that first at bat, but he walks in his next 2. That walk in the 7th inning starts a rally. You had Luis Angel Acuna come up after that, and finally he's looking like he's hitting against left-handed pitching. He gets a knock. Alvy goes first to third. That sets up Francisco Lindor. Well, actually, it sets up Brandon Nimmo, who gets hit by a pitch after they went to the bullpen. They pulled Tyler Anderson in that 7th inning. They get another lefty in Reed Detmers to face Nimmo, and he throws a breaking ball that just doesn't break. So very easy for Nimmo to turn his back, take his base. Lindor comes up with the bases juice, hits a ground ball, able to beat it out so it's not a double play. It scores a run. He gets that RBI by beating it out. Then he steals second base during Juan Soto's at bat. And Soto, not trying to do too much, just gets the job done, hits a ground ball, finds a hole in the infield, scores the 2 runs. All of a sudden, it's a new ball game, 5-5. So great rally by the Mets in that inning. Brooks Raley comes on in the 8th, and what a steadying presence looks like Brooks Raley is going to be for this bullpen. Just another strong frame. He has, we'll knock on some wood, but he's yet to give up a run since coming back into live competition. Didn't give up a run on rehab. Now he's not giving up a run in his first 2 appearances. He's just a guy that has confidence in his stuff in the zone, knows what he's doing as a quality pitcher, pounds the strike zone, and gets outs. So huge inning for him to keep the game knotted up. And then in the bottom of the 8th inning, Brett Baty drew a 1-out walk, and that brought up Francisco Alvarez in a crucial at-bat. And Alvy was on time for the fastball in a way that we haven't seen at the big league level in some time, because that's always been one of the biggest struggles for Alvarez. It's, of course, at times chasing and putting himself in bad positions in at-bats, but also just not being on time for the fastball. And here he was getting himself in a better position. You saw it's about getting the foot down a little bit sooner, having a little more rhythm with his hands, and it's working for him. I mean, he even scorched a couple foul balls in this game. That just shows you he's just more on time, more in command, way more confident. He drives the baseball, out to right field over Chris Taylor's head. Granted, that ball did have a lot of hang time. It could have been caught. But even with that said, he hit it over 103 miles per hour off the bat, hit off the top of the wall in right field, and was a well-struck double, however you slice it. Brett Baty had to hold because, again, that could have been caught. So he had runners at second and third with the chance there with 1 out to grab a lead for Edwin Diaz. And Ronnie Mauricio came in to pinch hit for Acuna to give you a left-handed bat against a right-handed pitcher. You saw the Angels countered, brought a lefty into the game, turned Mauricio around. He still got the job done. I mean, he hit the ball hard in play. You just got to put the ball in play and see what happens. And Yoan Moncada made a nice job fielding the grounder, but it's a poor defensive team, and it showed. Makes a bad throw home, but also a throw that Logan O'Hoppe probably could have handled. He doesn't, and allows Brett Baty to score when he was dead to rights on the contact play because the ball was just hit way too hard, so he was just caught in that no man's land. Luckily for the Mets, the Angels' mistake is something they can capitalize on. Baty scores there. Brandon Nimmo hits a sacrifice fly that scores Alvarez. The Mets get an insurance run for Edwin Diaz. He didn't even need it, though, because Edwin looked dominant in the 9th inning, striking out the side to pick up the save. So a great win for the New York Mets, and one where Francisco Alvarez and Brett Baty played pivotal roles at the bottom of that lineup. Could those 2 guys maturing at this stage in their career lead the Mets to stand pat at the deadline? Do they have enough? David Stearns seems to think they do. I want to talk about that more here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling with FanDuel? You can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and it makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing the same game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button to help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. Make sure you also put that notification bell on so you are notified anytime a new episode of Locked On Mets drops. And also, you're notified when we go live after the games. Every night, there is a Locked On Mets postcast hosted by Chris Schubert. So if you want Mets content right after the final out of the game, all you got to do is hit that subscribe button and you'll know whenever we go live. Now, let's talk a little bit about this lineup. And what we heard today is David Stearns met with the media 10 days ahead of the trade deadline. First and foremost, you saw the impact of Francisco Alvarez and Brett Baty on this game. And you got to remember that development is not linear. Some guys are going to pop right away, and then they might struggle. Perfect example, Corbin Carroll was great when he debuted in, 2022. Didn't play enough games to lose his rookie status. 2023, he's Rookie of the Year, but he was top 5 in MVP voting, helped the Diamondbacks get to the World Series. 2024, he was pretty brutal early on in the year, but then he came back around, and now he's been back playing at an all-star level. It happens with guys. It's not always a straight line up. It usually does have peaks and valleys. And so for a guy like Francisco Alvarez, rookie season, 25 home runs, great defense as a 21-year-old catcher, you're thinking, all right, this guy is well on his way. I know it's just baseball. We had Francisco Alvarez ranked as a top 10 catcher in the game going into the 2024 season. Last year, some valleys. He struggled, dealt with an injury. Defense was still good, but maybe not as good based on some of the metrics as 2023. And the bat was different. The power was gone. It was more of a contact guy than he had been in the year prior. Got on base at a little bit of a better clip, but still not that breakout we were expecting. Then there's this year. Absolute struggles. But he's 23 years old. And this is a guy that was trending towards being the top prospect in baseball at one point in time. He was a consensus top 10 prospect in the game. The Mets have not had a prospect that highly touted since David Wright, quite honestly. I mean, there's been a couple guys. Lasting's Millage was high on some top 100 lists at one point in time. Carlos Gomez had a lot of prospect shine. I'm sure there's others I'm forgetting. Michael Conforto was just not a prospect long enough because he made his way to the big leagues so quick, but he had a lot of buzz around him when he came up. So obviously there's been guys, Pete Alonso certainly was I think for at least some outlets, top 100 prospect. A lot of people just doubted him based on the defense. But the point stands, when it comes to guys that are so highly regarded across the game from all the different scouts and outlets that cover it, Francisco Alvarez was as highly touted of a prospect as the Mets have had, and Brett Baty was not far behind, a consensus near top 30 prospect going into the 2023 season. I mentioned their prospect status just to say that these are guys that put up really big numbers throughout their minor league careers that were billed as future stars. And yes, it's taken some time. The jump to big league competition is very difficult, and both of these guys have been hit with injuries over the last couple of years that have stopped them and slowed them at times too. But now here they are, and it seems like they are starting to gain that footing at the big league level to really be a long-term piece of the Mets, or just guys that are going to have long careers. And I think for Baty, That's more evident this season because for Alvarez, we're hoping that what he just did going down in the minor leagues really is going to stick and is going to come back and be this guy that he looked like for a night, but it's one night. We can't say, oh, he's fixed. I hope he's fixed. I'm encouraged that he has figured things out. But Brett Baty, this has been months now of just continued progression. Hot streaks, yes, still some cold streaks, but not giving up at bats during those cold streaks, not looking frustrated or lost, not looking like a guy that just can't compete. He has given you solid at bats the whole way through. He has run into his little strengths of a power surge. We're seeing it lately. You look at what Brett Baty has done over his last 15 games in 297, 395 on base, 568 slug, 3 home runs in the last 15 games, couple coming out of the break here. That's a 963 OPS in his past 15 games played. Look at his last 30 games played, 256 average, 337 on base, 442 slug. Do I think that could be Brett Baty's line moving forward? Like, could he play to that for the next 5 years? I honestly think he can. Being at a close to 340 on base, slugging close to a 450 slug. If you put it all together for a season, it could be an 800 OPS guy. But right now, over the last 30 games, that's a 779 OPS with great defense at third base. Popped 4 home runs across the 30-game span, stolen a couple of bases, 3 bags, 10 RBIs. That's a good player. And over the course of a full season, if Brett Baty is hitting 25 home runs for you, stealing maybe 10 to 15 bags, getting on base at that 340 clip, slugging over 400, you're talking about a mid 700 OPS guy who's giving you really good defense at 2 positions and could just be your third baseman of the future that, depending on the competition in the National League, which right now, Brian Hayes should have that gold glove on lock for a while. He's just that elite. But Baty could be a finalist at third base defensively when it comes to a gold glove. That's how good he has looked there. That's a 4-1 player. That is an above average regular. So I think right now, and when you hear David Stearns, when he's asked about third base and he thinks the Mets are good, I believe that's about Brett Baty more than that's about Mark Vientos or Ronnie Mauricio. I think they believe Brett Baty is an everyday player now. And that's a really good sign for this team moving forward. And then Alvarez, he gives you just a much higher ceiling than any catcher you ever could have considered, trading for at the deadline, certainly. And he's an upgrade over Luis Torrens. Torrens is a very good backup. He's not a guy that can elevate your team offensively as a starting catcher. Francisco Alvarez, if he's commanding the box and his at-bats the way he did in this game, that's a guy that absolutely can be a big bat near the bottom of your lineup. If Francisco Alvarez is running into some home runs out of the 8-hole and giving you good defense behind the dish, you're good. So now you look at the starting lineup. If those guys really can hold on to this and they can be above average contributors both ways for the Mets down the stretch, you're looking at a starting lineup where it's Brandon Nimmo, Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil. No notes. Those 5 guys are solid everyday players. McNeil, we'll find out about center field or second base, but he's having a good season. Mark Vientos, I'm encouraged with his at-bats lately. I think he can hold down DH. And if he can, and you got Baty and Alvarez, your third baseman, or at times maybe Baty at second with Alvarez catching, that's 8 spots in the lineup right there. So then it just comes down to that last spot. And I think the Mets are encouraged with what they've seen from Mauricio. And I think they're probably a little bit encouraged with Acuna as well. Can those 2 guys platoon in that last spot, even if it means that Acuna is getting his starts at second against left-handed pitching and against right-handed pitching, it's Mauricio at third and Baty at second? I think the Mets could roll with that. And that's why when you look at this team and you still have Tyrone Taylor, an ideal 4th outfielder, Luis Torrens as an ideal backup catcher, you're talking about 1 roster spot. And you have veterans who are hurt in Starling Marte, Jesse Winker, and Jose Siri that could factor in this season. You have Jared Young as a placeholder right now. That's where when David Stearns was asked about it, he talked about a certain bar that the Mets have gotten to and that he is pretty comfortable with where they're at with their position player group. So I want to talk about the specifics of his comments here in just a minute. And he also kind of gave a hint towards where the Mets are looking at the deadline. And spoiler, it's looking at the bullpen. So we'll get into all of that here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had a service emergency, like a burst pipe. If the first plumber didn't answer, did you wait? Nope, you called the next one. That's why having a reliable business line is so important. That's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communication, all from an app on your phone or computer. Your whole team can share one number and respond to customers like a shared inbox. No more, who's handling this? And the AI agent handles after hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so you never miss a customer again. Open Phone is offering Locked On Mets listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnMLB. That's openphone, openphone.com/LockedOnMLB. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service, so you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime, take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways, and get a live graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what David Stearns said to the media today. The one place that he said they will be actively looking to add is the bullpen. Every contender is looking to add to the bullpen, but the Mets are no different. They clearly have a need there. He said that if they can't get a deal done, they would then think about converting he just said some of their pitching in AAA, but you can read between the lines, converting Nolan McLean and or Brandon Sproat, shortening one or both of those guys up and making them options to pitch out of the pen. David Stearns has done this in the past with Corbin Burns and Freddie Peralta, guys that would go on to be top-tier starting pitchers in Major League Baseball, but broke in as relievers, helping teams down the stretch. So the Mets have options. He also cautioned against trying to make a big splash. Somebody asked him about that. He said, I try not to focus on the size of the splash, so that's where you can get in trouble, where you're chasing, that big splash, and you might give up more than you want to. And he said, instead, you want to focus on how good the player is coming back and how they fit the team needs. So as you look at the team needs, it's pretty interesting to see it from David Stearns' perspective, because when asked about the position players, he was way more optimistic than I think the fan base would be, considering the offensive production. David Stearns looks at this as a team that has gotten pretty good production, particularly, as he said, over the last 2 to 4 weeks, which is where Ronnie Mauricio and Brett Baty have really started to give you some more quality at bats at the bottom of the lineup. All of a sudden, Mark Vientos starting to hit a little bit better as well. You've seen Acuna, after a demotion, come back up, look like a little bit of a better, more confident player. Same thing with Alvarez. The Mets believe in these young players. They do. And he described how you're getting long at bats from the bottom of the lineup. You turn the lineup over more frequently. He didn't say it, but I think one place you can look towards where the Mets have struggled offensively over the last couple of weeks, if not the past month, it's your two main guys that have been doing it on this team for a long time. Lindor and Alonso have not been swinging the bat well. Soto and Nimmo have. Jeff McNeil has. But that's been a big issue, is the fact that Francisco Lindor is really going through it, and Pete Alonso is as well. Getting those guys back and having the same production at the bottom of the lineup that the Mets have had recently, it could do a world of a difference. And you're just seeing even tonight, Juan Soto not trying to hit the 3-run homer that gives the Mets the lead. Runners at second and third, situational hitting. Don't try to do too much. Get a ground ball through. Okay, that's going to score 2 runs. Brandon Nimmo did it on Sunday. Not trying to do too much, not even taking a full swing, sees a hole on the right side of the infield, hits a ground ball there. Sometimes you just got to get back to the basics. And I think the Mets can do that and still have a successful offense. But he also talked about center field being a clear position where the Mets have not gotten the production that they expected. Now, Tyrone Taylor, as he mentioned, they love his defense. He said Jeff McNeil is getting more and more comfortable out there, which has, to them, risen the bar over the past 2 weeks of what they think they have at center field. And they've talked about, or he talked about, how they're comfortable with Jeff McNeil as their center fielder. So that's a bar that they're going to try to eclipse at the deadline. But clearing that bar is not going to be easy. We've talked about the options. Jarren Duran's going to take an absolute haul. He is the one player that can be had at the center field position. That's a no doubt about it upgrade over what the Mets have. Cedric Mullins, he's going to be available. Orioles are out of it. He's had a very up and down season. Do you believe that Cedric Mullins is a better option in center field than Jeff McNeil? It's not even like Cedric Mullins is an outstanding defender in center. Yes, he's more athletic than Jeff McNeil. Yes, he has way more experience playing center field than Jeff McNeil. But pound for pound, I don't know if he's a better player than Jeff McNeil in center field right now because McNeil just outweighs the production so much offensively. And that's going to be true with a lot of the guys you could acquire. It's true with Harrison Bader. Harrison Bader's having a good season. There's been some rumblings. Maybe the Mets would be interested in bringing Bader back. I don't think it's the worst idea. I think Harrison Bader is still probably a better defensive center fielder than even Tyrone Taylor. And he's swinging a better bat this year. Do I think that that's a move that the Mets should invest heavily on? No, I honestly think they'd be better off getting Willie Castro from the Twins instead, sticking him at second base and keeping McNeil in center. I really do. So we'll see. We'll see. Can you do better than Ronnie Mauricio and Acuna in a platoon with what you can acquire at the deadline? Can you do better than Jeff McNeil and Tyrone Taylor as a platoon in center field? Can you find a better piece? I talked about Luis Robert on the show yesterday. I think there's definitely an argument to be made that he makes a lot of sense for the Mets just as a change of scenery candidate. We talked about on yesterday's show how Andrew Vaughn and Gavin Sheets have both thrived once they got out of Chicago. Even Yoan Moncada is having a pretty nice season for the Angels, to be honest with you. So clearing Robert from a bad situation with the White Sox, having a guy that mashes left-handed pitching and can play elite defense in center field, has a ton of speed on the bases. It's not a bad high ceiling option to go after. And you can then, as I talked about in yesterday's show, move Jeff McNeil into the infield, give Robert some run in center field, see what happens. If it works, awesome. If it's not working, he can go back to being a platoon player. And now Jeff McNeil is platooning with Luis Robert instead of Tyrone Taylor. We'll see. We'll see how it all comes together. But it does feel like the Mets might just stay internal. And they might just say, you know what? The price for Luis Robert is too high because you're going to have to take on a lot of money. It's $5 million for the rest of this season, basically, if you look at the prorated salary, and then a $2 million buyout. That's a lot of money for a guy that's been below a 600 OPS for most of this season. I don't know if he's finally got above that with his recent hot stretch, but you know, it's you don't want to give up too much for a guy like Luis Robert who has struggled so much this season. You have to be realistic, or the White Sox should be realistic about what he has been this year. Granted, over his last 7 games, sitting 400, trying to play himself off that roster, and the OPS is actually up to 636. So we'll see. We'll see what the Mets do in center field. But it does feel like they might not make a move. Granted, I said the exact same thing last year when it came to this lineup, and they went out and they traded for Jesse Winker. So I think the Mets are going to be opportunistic, certainly, in the position player market, just like they were opportunistic last year to grab a depth arm in Paul Blackburn when I wasn't really expecting them to add to the rotation. But David Stearns also sort of mentioned the confidence in what they have internally. When it came to Clay Holmes, someone asked about innings limits, shutting him down, and he said industry standard has changed because putting guys on strict inning limits was not working, was not preventing injury. So now teams are more willing to let guys go if they are feeling good. And right now, Clay Holmes is still feeling good. So the Mets are going to roll with him in the rotation. And they have McGill and Blackburn as further depth guys on the injured list that might play a role this year. They have Blade Tidwell on the 40-man roster. Not that I think he should really be in a starting rotation for an extended period of time, but having McLean and Sproat in AAA does give you a couple more options to feel more confident in what you have. And you're getting Senga, Minaya, and Montas now acclimated in their rotation. And theoretically, all those guys have less wear and tear on their arms due to the injuries they've suffered throughout this season, where maybe they all hit their stride at the right time in the stretch run. And with those three and David Peterson, that could be a playoff rotation. So I don't necessarily know if the Mets are going to add to the rotation unless kind of the right fit presents itself. So that leads to the bullpen, where it seems like they're going to be the most active. And as much as David Stearns doesn't want to talk about splashes, I do think a big splash is required. I talked about it on the deadline shows, where you have Edwin Diaz, who I think could use a Robin to his Batman, but also you have to acknowledge that Diaz very well can take this great season he's had opt out and get a long-term deal. And I think having a new closer in place just in case, not only is that good in case Diaz walks, but it gives you more leverage. Because I think the Mets could be sitting in a very similar free agent situation with Edwin Diaz that were with Pete Alonso this offseason, where you're playing a game of chicken because you know the player doesn't want to leave. And Diaz took deferred money before, so you never know. You might be able to get more of a sweetheart deal in keeping Edwin Diaz as sort of a legacy closer because you went out and got an elite setup man that can close if Diaz moves on. So maybe it is a David Bednar. Maybe they do swing for the fences on a Clase or a Duran. We'll see. But it feels like that's where the biggest ad is going to come at this deadline. And if they do get one of those arms, Diaz, let's say it's Bednar. Diaz, Bednar, Raley as your, or maybe it'd be Raley, Bednar, Diaz as your 7, 8, 9. It's pretty good, especially when you still have Reed Garrett who can put out fires at any point throughout a game. You have Jose Budos throwing the ball exceptionally well this year. He should be back pretty soon. Huascar Brazaban's been up and down, but I think you still trust him, especially if he becomes your 6th, 7th, or 8th guy in the bullpen. And Ryan Stanek is a streaky pitcher that could always get hot in October and be just as reliable as anybody else with plenty of playoff experience. So when you look at it that way, you get one big fish, and the addition of Raley in this pen really does give you a pretty solid grouping. And Raley has basically replaced AJ Minter, who's lost, I think the Mets have felt for months now. So I think they're in better shape with Raley in tow right now. And it's also for a fan base that was probably frustrated to see David Robertson sign with the Phillies. We talked about that on yesterday's show. The Phillies are spending $5.5 million on a prorated $16 million salary for David Robertson this year. They're spending a lot of money for Robertson for 1 year. Against the luxury tax, he's like a $12 million investment. This year, the Mets, I think it's I got it right here. $1.5 million for Brooks Raley. So all in with the luxury tax, a $3 million investment. And then a buyout for only $350K on a club option that the Mets will almost certainly pick up for $4.75 million next year. They'll get a full season of Brooks Raley next year for less than what the Phillies are paying for 2 months of David Robertson. Just a huge, huge sign the Mets are able to pull off midseason here. So that's where they're at. But the deadline continues to get closer and closer. And hearing some of David Stearns' comments, it does feel like the place the Mets are going to be looking to add the most impact player will likely be the bullpen. But you cannot rule out the chance of getting opportunistic in center field or in the starting pitching market. It feels like that's where they're at, especially because there's just not a lot of infield options. And with the Mets seemingly being comfortable at third base, as David Stearns alluded to today, I don't think they're going to end up with Gino Suarez. So I think that's a crowded market for Suarez that the Mets probably aren't going to be competing in. And so it kind of narrows your focus on what's out there to center field potentially. Or maybe, again, I still think Willie Castro is a really good fit for second base as like a utility guy that's just going to give you a good at bat. But that is where we're at for now. Of course, I'll continue to talk about all of this stuff over the next week and change here. I appreciate all of you for tuning into the show today. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on one of the audio platforms, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on social media, Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets if you want to be a Locked On Mets insider. Find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Check out Locked On MLB Game Night, the show that'll take you around all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from our local experts, as well as our league-wide experts that'll take you through all of the action. You can find Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel, as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.